This is your host, Dylan Shobe, and today I'm joined with Gill MacDonald on 88.9 The Bridge, and we have the honor today to sit down with Anish Shroff. As of late, Anish served as the voice of the Carolina Panthers in the 2022 to 2023 season, running play-by-play for the Panthers radio network, and has conducted many other live sports broadcasts, such as football, college baseball, basketball, and my personal favorite, lacrosse. Being a sports broadcaster had always been a dream of Anish's, and his journey sent him from Syracuse, where he received his bachelor's in broadcast journalism, to across the country to Yakima, Washington, then on to ESPN's second ever reality television show, Dream Job. And then once again, later back to ESPN in 2008 as a studio anchor and host. From his broad resume, I find his lacrosse coverage the most impressive. In 2017 to 2018, Anish became lead play-by-play for NCAA lacrosse games on ESPN. Speaking from the heart, Anish, you have become one of the most influential voices in the sport of lacrosse, and it's been an honor for me to hear you in my living room on college game day Saturdays. I will say once more, what an honor it is for Gill and I to interview you, and how are you doing today?
Well, I appreciate the warm welcome, and I appreciate the kind words. So I'm doing well. Lacrosse season has just started. For those that watched our first broadcast, it wasn't, from a technical standpoint, the cleanest production with no audio for the entire first half, but it's February lacrosse for everybody, I guess. So here we are.
No, Kim, warming up. But switching from lacrosse to football, what'd you think of that Super Bowl last night? And I also wanted to ask, you think the Panthers are going to be hoisting the Lombardi Trophy next year?
I don't know about next year, but they're building something. They've got a good young core. The Super Bowl last night, I thought up until the final moments, the holding call, I saw the quotes from the player where he said it was holding. The receiver said he felt he was held. It just seemed a little benign for that moment. And I understand you got to call the call, right call. I'm not sure it was the right call in that moment. Up until that point, it had all the trappings of a classic Super Bowl. You had two great quarterbacks who were playing incredibly well. And what Mahomes was able to do coming out of halftime, bum ankle and all, that run that he had in the fourth quarter on the game-winning drive. You know, I texted some buddies last night. I said, sometimes you have to take yourself out of the moment and realize you are watching one of the all-time great quarterbacks who's still very young in his career, but he is probably close to his absolute pinnacle right now. And you got to sit back and enjoy it. And that's what we're seeing with Patrick Mahomes. And Philly's not going anywhere with the roster they've built. But to me, that was singular excellence from Patrick Mahomes. And it was impressive to see with the Panthers. Certainly, the NFC South is interesting. Tom Brady having retired, there's a power vacuum in the division. They need to find a quarterback. They've got their head coach. They need to find their quarterback. So much of their trajectory over next year and the year after depends what happens with that position.
Yeah, on our show last week, I'll get my last word on the Super Bowl before getting to you, of course. But what I was saying to Gill and my other co-hosts for our sports show is that a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to see the Chiefs win, like, oh, they've been so good. But you got to like take yourself out and realize that you're watching greatness. Like Mahomes has been in 2 Super Bowls already. If he's going to win his second here, don't be mad at it. But it's also great to see if the Eagles are going to win here. So really, that was a tale of 2 awesome, great teams. You weren't really mad at whoever won that one. Obviously, there was the turf. There were lots of the holding calls. So people are going to have.
Unless you're an Eagles fan, then you might have been a little ticked off. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to go a little bit back into your broadcast history in the 2000s. You said that during that period of time, you were on the fence about your future in broadcasting, but that your job at 570 WSYR boosted your confidence and gave you context that helped you in the future. What piece of advice can you give from that experience that can help people navigate challenges when it comes to pursuing their dream passion and job?
Yeah, so that was WSYR, the TV station, which was WSYR TV in Syracuse, New York. And we all hit a crossroads in our careers. I was still pretty young at the time. I'd been working out in Yakima, Washington, and I had put together what I thought was a solid demo, and I had been getting bites in some major markets. You're in market 126, you're looking to take a big leg up, and I had bites in Orlando and Portland, Oregon, and I thought I could make a pretty significant jump. And then the next thing you know, my job in Yakima ends up getting cut. I get transferred to news, and then started getting homesick, and I wanted to come back to the East Coast. So out of, I guess you can call it a little bit of desperation, I took a job with this sports documentary company. And after the first day, I realized the two guys who were running it, it was a startup, didn't really know what they were doing. And this was a rudderless operation that was not going to last. So I started sending out tapes again, and I ended up getting an interview offer in Syracuse. And I thought, yeah, man, I was close to some other bigger jobs, and now I'm kind of going back to where I started. Is this what I want to do? I bought a couple of LSAT books. Maybe I'll go to law school. And I went to Syracuse. I kind of had about a 2 or 3 year plan there. And after about 6 months, I ended up getting an interview with ESPN. So in the span of a year, things changed, and things changed quickly. But for me, I've never been afraid to bet on myself. And so at the end of the day, I just felt, hey, if I got an opportunity, I just need a chance. And I got some chances at ESPN early in my career. I got some chances to do some creative content in Syracuse. And I felt if I just get an opportunity to do that stuff, I do feel I can stand out. I do feel I can separate it. I do feel I had a distinct voice that I can bring, in my presentation, and things ended up working out. But yeah, there was a moment of weakness there where, you're wondering, you don't make a lot of money, especially in the beginning in this profession. When I say don't make a lot, it's peanuts. And you're thinking, is there maybe a more safer path? Is there a safer path to go down? But I'm glad I stuck with it.
You were touching on right there how you're willing to bet all on yourself, especially once the opportunity is given to you. I want to ask you, Anish, as broadcasters, I know it's always, every time you go on the mic, you try to be as confident as you can and just give 100% of yourself into the game that you're talking about, or if it's a news story. I wanted to ask, when was the last time you were nervous to be on air? I know you touched on at the start, the lacrosse broadcast you just did for the first half. There's technical difficulties, and entering into a game like that, having no audio at the start, I'm sure that'd be very nerve-wracking for me, but I know with all the experience you have, it probably wasn't as nerve-wracking. But when was the last time you just went on air and had those butterflies?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part of your question first about the broadcast from Saturday. So we're doing the game remotely. We're not on site. I'm doing it basically in this setup. I've got a camera here. I've got a 27-inch monitor here. I've got a laptop in front of me that's got 4 little cameras about the size of your Zoom screen. And 5 seconds after we come on the air, everything goes black. We're off the air. The internet goes down in Virginia. So wasn't really anything to get nervous for because we were off the air. And so the first half ran without any announcer audio. When we got back at the beginning of the third quarter, at that point, we could not hear anything except each other. I could hear Paul Carcaterra, my analyst. He could hear me. We couldn't hear the whistle. We couldn't hear the crowd. We couldn't hear the net sounds of the game. We could not hear our producer and director. We had no clue when we were going to commercial break, coming back from commercial break. Everything was done over text. And again, when you can't hear the sounds of the game, you're focused on the game. So you can't be looking at your phone the entire time. So from a nerve standpoint, there weren't a lot of nerves. I prepared the game. At that point, it was, we just need to be honest and authentic with our viewers and our listeners. Hey, this is what's going on. This is the reality. We're trying our best. And I think if you present that authenticity, people understand the predicament you're in. So we let people know, we apologize for the technical difficulties. A lot of it was out of our hand. It was out of the truck's hand. And you have a sense of humor about it. You laugh about it. The last time I was nervous for a broadcast, it's funny. I don't think I've been nervous for a broadcast in a long, long time. And then week 1 of the NFL season, the Panthers were playing the Browns. That was my first NFL game for the Panthers. I had butterflies before the game, and it actually felt kind of nice. It felt kind of cool because it was something new. I'd been covering college sports for so long. I'd done a preseason game for the Broncos the year before, but preseason's different. I had done 3 preseason games for the Panthers. But again, that just doesn't have the same gravitas of a regular season NFL game. And to do it in my hometown, Charlotte's where I live, to see a packed house, it felt new. It felt different. It was a good sort of nerves. But I tell a lot of young broadcasters, when you're preparing to go on air, whether it's a studio show, whether it's a live broadcast, a game, if you do it right and you treat the week the way you're supposed to, the easiest 3 hours are the 3 hours you're calling the game. calling the game becomes difficult only when you haven't done the work and you haven't done the prep. It's the same thing as going in for a test. If you know the material, they can throw anything at you guys. If you don't know the material, that's going to be torturous as you take the test. It's the same in our business. If you're prepared and you know the material, you'll be able to react to everything that comes from knowing the base material. If you're not, then you're in trouble and calling the game becomes difficult.
I think it's a great analogy, and it's really impressive. I would say that to credit the thinking on your feet as you did in the lacrosse broadcast, would you say that that's from all the experience that you had from other broadcasts, and that you know you're going to be okay, and if you focus in on certain parts that are going to need it, like calling the game, and obviously you had to look at your phone to know how the production was going to go and when you were on and all of that. So would you say that it was your experience from many other broadcasts that helped you?
I think what your experience helps in that area is just to stay calm and not get rattled. Okay, they're going to work through this. There's nothing that I can do. Were we frustrated at the beginning because it was the first game of the year and that's how we're coming on the air? Sure. Of course we were. Once that happens, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make the best out of this? How do we make chicken salad? And we were tossing around ideas like, hey, we can watch the game on our YouTube TV. Maybe we do an Instagram Live or a Periscope just to give our viewers almost a Manning cast type of feel when you're coming back and you're calling the game after not having been able to call the first half. People who are watching have seen things develop. You're probably not calling it the way you would where you're on every pass. We're now on a delay because of the feed. There were so many factors that went into it. You just try to stay calm, do the best you can, and really keep it simple. If you try to jam everything in, now you're making it too complicated where you don't have the normal machinery that you would during a normal broadcast. So you just sort of learn to keep it simple, especially in those big moments when there's breaking news, when something's happening. A lot of times when you're prepared, it just allows you to hone in. Hey, let's focus here, keep it simple, tell the story.
I love that. I'm going to keep with lacrosse here. So I heard you talk about the love you developed for lacrosse at Syracuse, and while striving to do basketball and football broadcasts for WAR in an interview, it was interesting to me because, please correct me if I'm wrong, you hadn't played or experienced the sport prior to your time at Syracuse. So for you to fall in love with a brand new sport through broadcasting is so fascinating to me. What was so special to lacrosse about you, and how did broadcasting really tie your love to the sport?
Well, two things happened. Circumstance played a big part. At our college radio station, WAER, like you mentioned, we had as the opportunity as students to do home and away games for college football back then. Syracuse was in the Big East. College basketball, home and away games. College lacrosse for the men's side, home and away games. Those opportunities don't often present themselves to college students. So this was a great opportunity where my time there, I'm getting to do Syracuse at Miami, Syracuse at Virginia Tech, and just stuff that frankly a lot of people don't get to do in their careers. We're getting to do as college students. But the little carrot they threw at us was, do you want to do football? Do you want to do basketball? Then you need to learn lacrosse. So I took that to heart. At my freshman and the beginning of my sophomore year, I would go to some of these high school games in central New York, which was a lacrosse hotbed, and would sit out in the stands and have a little tape recorder, and you'd go with a friend and we would alternate quarters and essentially make a tape and learn the rules and learn the cadence and figure out your voice and your call. And then another little thing happened. In my 4 years at Syracuse, I overlapped with a player by the name of Michael Powell, who's on the Rushmore of lacrosse. This guy was Pete Maravich and Magic Johnson and Wayne Gretzky on the lacrosse field. He was an absolute magician, and I got to see 4 years of one of the greatest players of all time. So when that's the team you cover and that's the sport that you are forced to cover, and you see a transcendent athlete, it becomes very easy to become a fan of the sport.
That is awesome. You're really nailing all of it. One of my other questions is going to be, basically, I made it a lot longer, but I was just going to ask you, obviously, because you mentioned Mike Powell, who do you believe is the GOAT in all of lacrosse? Just to throw you a little fun question to take a swing at.
I would still say Gary Gait, just because of how he
and the Syracuse there, of course, yeah. So
yeah,
there's the connection with that.
Gait, they're changing rules because of him. Him and his brother Paul, when they got to Syracuse, they elevated the program. But I just think overall, he brought the sport into a new age. It was almost like he came into the world of college lacrosse, him and his brother, these two Canadians, and there was this cosmic stardust that they sprinkled on the sport. And by the time they were done, you went from, the end of the dark ages into this renaissance. So Gary Gait, from creativity, impact, and then how great he was as a player, he inspired Michael Powell. He inspired the generations that came after. I would start with Gary Gait. But certainly, the two best players that I've seen since I've been following the sport, it's Mike Powell and Lyle Thompson. Those guys are very similar in their style, their showmanship, but there's also a lot of substance behind what they do. And to me, again, when I'm trying to bring the sport to people who are not familiar with it, I always think of where I was when I latched onto the sport. And when you have that transcendent superstar, to me, that's a real opportunity to grow the game. Watch this guy. Watch this guy. You're mesmerized. Hey, I want to watch more of this sport.
The last question I have for you, Anish, you were touching on going out to those high school lacrosse games, filming the videos, finding your call and your voice. How did you develop such a distinct, clear, passionate voice? I know you touched on betting on yourself and your voice. Was it just through hard work and practice, or was there vocal training mixed in? How did you get to where you are today?
I always tell people the last thing that comes really is the voice. It's what you say, sometimes more than how you say it, or how deep your voice might be, or the cadence. Once you can figure out what it is that you're saying, the substance, the words, once you can figure out how to manipulate language, that's the chess part of this. That separates chess and checkers. And so what I did when I was 18 years old, when I was a freshman at Syracuse, I used to read a lot, and I really, really became a voracious reader starting my senior year of high school, the summer afterwards. So the summer between my senior year of high school, my freshman year of college, I'm a middle-class kid going to a private school like Syracuse. I'm on scholarship. I'm on financial aid. And I had this chip on my shoulder. I'm going to now compete with all these kids who've had access to tutors and private education and more access and more things. I got to be ready. And so I went to the library and I was reading 2-3 books a week. And it wasn't just, garbage. It was classics, right? Catch-22 and Clockwork Orange. And I started to keep a notebook once I got to college, and anything that I read, anything that I found interesting, turn of a phrase, a word, an author using a noun as a verb, or vice versa, I just wrote it down in this notebook. And I've kept notebooks like that for years, and I've got about a dozen of them. And now, with our phones, we've got our notes app. So I'll be reading something and I'll just make a note of it on my phone. And what I do before each broadcast, I don't memorize. I don't try to, plan and orchestrate. Oh, I'm going to use this line today. I'll just bring a notebook with me and I just leaf through it. I don't know, 20 minutes, 15 minutes before we go on the air. And it just puts ideas, words, thoughts in my mind. Some games I don't use any of it. Some games I use a few. And sometimes I'll see something and I said, hey, that might be good in the open if I'm trying to sell this story and I'm trying to, phrase a certain narrative, using the right words. So I've done that for now 22 years. And I feel that has helped me more than anything. Once you have that, then you can build on everything. The foundational piece of what we do is writing. And how do you become a better writer? You read. So when you can write, I always tell people, and I always tell young guys, you got to continue to polish that stone. Some folks might think, well, you're going on air, you're doing live games, you're going off the cuff. How is that writing? It is writing. You're writing to a moment. You're writing to moments. You're writing to multiple moments. You're doing it in real time. You're doing it without autocorrect. You're doing it without a delete key. You're doing it in that moment. And so you always bring a writer's perspective to what you can do. And the best guys in this business, from what I've seen, are the ones who can write to those moments and find those right words in that moment. So, to answer your question, the long of it I gave you, the short of it is read.
Yeah, there's all of that. I mean, there's been studies, obviously, that reading helps so much with students' performance in class, and obviously they're writing essays and certain things, and that as an audio form is the same thing as when you're writing by hand because it's all coming from your mind. So I think that's a really interesting part that I haven't considered in the whole picture of broadcast is that reading and writing and all these other compositions of the English language can really help you perform, as you said, that it helps you have in your entire career. And I think
I'll
that
give you
really
an
does.
example. I'll give you an example. And this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just
I was gonna ask you. That'd be awesome.
these are just again from my
Yeah,
notes page,
Yeah.
just stuff that I've read over the last few years, and then you figure out where do you want to emphasize it, right? Bowling ball shouldered, steel hammer, and so I just wrote in parentheses around it, steel hammer stiff arm. That'd be a cool way to describe a stiff arm.
Oh, okay.
That's a good one.
Pure alchemy, right? If there's some trick play or some guy makes an incredible play, it's a way to describe that. This just, I haven't used it yet. I just liked how it sounded. Not all who wander are lost. I think I saw somewhere on the side of a paint can where it said gunmetal gray. And I thought when I'm doing a Panthers game, that would be a great way to describe the sky. If we have these dark, overcast skies, gunmetal gray skies on radio, you're describing, right? Joysticks as a way to describe a player moving through a defense. I saw something, it said painted paradise, and I thought that'd be a cool way to describe the end zone. We talk about turf monster. So here it said surrenders to the earth. And I said, that's another way of saying
That's awesome.
turf monster, corkscrews into the paint, right? A riptide of defenders, a defense that can block out the sun. You have all these different things that, and there's so many more, but all these different things that you can incorporate into your own style. And that's what happens when you're young. You beg, borrow, and steal from other people. And then as you grow, that fuses into a style that's uniquely your own.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of those are even like specifics, and it reminds me of like when you just close your eyes and you listen to the greats as for example, Vin Scully, is that they're able to paint this picture in your mind when you're watching or in his time, it was listening to the broadcast on radio.
Right.
So all of the steel hammer, stiff arm, I mean, all of that really helps the viewer or the listener really capture the experience, and it elevates them to a new higher level that it wasn't before with just standard use of language like most people would. So I think that's what's awesome about what you're doing here with broadcasting.
Yeah, and I always go back to it. Language is the crux of what we do. I used to listen to Bob Costas, and Costas always made me smarter. And I always thought his turn of a phrase, if you go back on YouTube, watch the NBA on NBC Opens from the 1990s before the NBA Finals. That was poetry. Those were magnificent. And I used to make sure I'd be in front of the TV, not for the opening tip, but for the opening tease. And I really liked how they sold a game and how they got you hyped up for a game and were able to craft a narrative. Chris Fowler, I think, is a wordsmith. Kurt Gowdy, you mentioned Vince Scully, Jack Buck. There's a lot we can learn from the guys who came before us. And again, it just goes back to language. Part of what we do is finding 9,000 ways to say the same thing over and over and over again.
I love that.
And so every week, that's part of the craft. That's part of the craft. It's a different way to describe it. I got my board right from Michigan, Virginia. So I just made notes by hand, and I say, how do I want to describe these guys? So for Griffin Schutz, the 6'3", 220 sophomore for Virginia, big guy, he can run downhill. He's got power, but he's also got great hands. So I just kind of wrote, as I'm thinking, what's a way to describe him? Strength of a caveman, finesse of a ninja. And you're just finding different ways again. And I do that, and I probably won't use that again. Maybe I will, but I probably won't. And you're trying to find the next guy. What's unique about him? When I watch him, how do I want to describe him? And that's part of the exercise. That's also part of the preparation. It's not just stats and stories and figures. It's, trying to bring the game and the characters to life.
Yeah, it's like all that you read, you were talking about, and then it all coming back to you, and then
Right.
making it sound authentic with your own voice and delivery. And
Yeah.
I think that does it for me on my question.
I think you said it best. It's
Yeah.
We've learned so much today. It's the ones who've came before us. So hopefully Gill and I can come after you. It'd be an honor. It was awesome to talk with you today. I mean, it's the first step in a long journey for us, hopefully, in broadcast. We thank you so much, Anish. It's been awesome to have your voice on our high school radio station. It was 88.9 The Bridge. So thank you, Anish, once again.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dylan Gill. It was a pleasure meeting you, and I really enjoyed talking to you guys. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nish.